Hello and welcome to this religion and diplomacy conversation focused on a new report from the U.S. Institute of Peace on advancing global peace and security through religious engagement, lessons to improve U.S. policy. My name is Judd Birdsall. I serve as the director of the Transatlantic Policy Network on Religion and Diplomacy, based at Georgetown University's Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by one of the co-authors of the USIP report, Dr. Chris Seiple. The other co-author is Peter Mandaville. Chris is a principal advisor to the Templeton Religion Trust and a senior fellow at the University of Washington's Jackson School of International Studies. And among many other distinctions, he has the distinction of being my first boss when I first moved out to Washington, D.C. in 2005, when he was president of the Institute for Global Engagement. And now he's in the role of president emeritus of IGE. Chris, welcome. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Well, it's good to be back, and I have to say that IG has not recovered from your departure, but we remain immensely blessed by your short tenure there and the wisdom that's resulted since and all the great writings that you've done. So thanks for having me.
My pleasure, and thank you. And of course, we are meeting in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which weighs heavily on our hearts and minds. And I'm sure we'll make reference to that conflict in the course of our conversation today, as it's one that painfully reminds us of the relevance of religion in international affairs, the need to take seriously the religious dimension of conflict alongside all the other factors that can drive and mitigate conflict. Well, Chris, let's start with definitions. This new report from USIP, and congratulations on it, revolves quite a bit around three interrelated terms: religious freedom, religious engagement, and religious literacy. How do you understand those three terms, and how do they relate to one another?
Well, thanks for the question. And I think that the three terms are in conversation is part of the emerging and nature of the field, as it were, or what even the field is. Religious freedom, of course, has been around for a long time, and most people would say that that's the freedom to choose, change, share, reject belief, or have no belief at all, and to bring those beliefs into the public square. That's very important to say, as equal citizens under the transparent rule of law in any country. Religious engagement is engaging actors who are motivated by their faith around a particular issue. It could be extremism, it could be the environment, etc. And religious literacy is itself new and is traditionally been known in the last 10 years about understanding something about other. And that term is also under evolution, as it were, in that there is a group of folks, myself among them, seeking to suggest that you have to account for yourself in that engagement. What do you and the other do, and how do you do something together with these global challenges that require partnership? And some of those partners are going to be people who don't believe like you do. In fact, it's guaranteed. So what does that mean? So thinking about these three things together is itself a type of literacy that we need, because there are stereotypes about religious freedom, and there are stereotypes about religious engagement. And religious literacy has been an academic topic for K through 12 that is now speaking into these other more defined fields, but all of it is still new and therefore exciting.
Thanks, Chris. And one of the things I appreciated about the report is its modesty. You don't oversell religious engagement. You don't oversell religious freedom, as important as those issues are. You don't oversell religious literacy. So what does a modest, realistic, yet strategic religious engagement look like in practice?
Well, it does. It's just that. It's modesty. I would go a step further. Good religious engagement begins with humility, and humility, especially for some people who are really hot after religion is more of a panacea, the missing factor and everything. Religious engagement takes place in the context of overall engagement. And so that requires that you engage the world as it is. You assess the people that you're trying to engage, the environment you're trying to influence and impact. Means that you should assess yourself. And sometimes religious actors are going to be key influencers in an environment. So that's just the nature of the world. So what does that mean? What does it look like? There are good actors, religious actors, there are bad religious actors. How do you have those conversations to accomplish the goals that you seek, whether you represent the State Department, a business, or an NGO? And the argument that we're making, Peter Mandaville and I, in strategic religious engagement, is that there's a spectrum of engagement, from the transactional, quid pro quo, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, to a transformational, which is the more you engage in a particular place, the relationships should emerge and go deeper. And when that happens, there's more chance for sustainable solutions, I would argue, because faith is something that transcends, not just in relationships, but in terms of a sociological explanatory framework for life and death in a particular context. And so whether it's transactional, transformational, or somewhere along the way, we're engaging the world as it is, engaging actors, some of whom are religious, who bring their faith and values to the table, which of course is a form and function of religious freedom.
And what difference can it make when we engage actors who are motivated by their faith, actors who are bringing their faith into the public square and into politics? I've been at plenty of conferences, and imagine you have too, where you have skeptics who ask, okay, if we do this and it's actually allowable, what difference would it practically make in the world?
Well, there's lots of examples, I think, but the one that comes to mind right now is the example from Nigeria when they wanted to distribute malaria nets. And you have a choice. Do you go through the political officials, or do you go through what they decided to do in this case was go through imams and pastors? And it turns out the imams and pastors were more trusted by the people than the politicians, which is true, pretty much everywhere. But this is the thing that people miss sometimes, and that in that religious actors also have their own distribution networks. They know where the churches are. They know they're connected already. They know where the mosques are, the synagogues, et cetera, the temples. So why not use them? Why not work with them? And of course, the key is, how do you come alongside somebody without trying to use them for your purpose, but to walk with them in mutual self-awareness, side by side, in the same strategic direction? I think that's the key to strategic religious engagement on any issue.
And that Nigeria example of malaria nets, that being a humanitarian need. And in the report, you talk about how USAID has a more highly institutionalized approach to religious engagement, just a more developed approach. And I imagine there's something similar or analogous at the Department of Defense, where you served for several years in the Marines, perhaps a more institutionalized, developed way of engaging religious actors around the world. Why is that? And what lessons can be drawn for other agencies that perhaps don't have as well developed a mechanism for engaging religious actors?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it reflects the nature of the organization. I was in the Marine Corps, I was an infantry officer, and we would always make fun of the Air Force because, they're removed from the front lines of engagement. They're doing the cyber stuff and flying over, right? And their Marines are dealing with the reality of a village or a place as it is. And I think AID is the same way. If you're on the DART team, disaster assistance response team, sent into a humanitarian situation, emergency, you just got to deal with the world as it is. Who are the influencers? How can I get stuff out? How do I accomplish this mission? How do I get from A to B? It's really what it is. And if you're religious, I don't care if you're religious or not. I just need to get the job done. Sometimes, and this is, being perhaps unfair to the State Department, but one of the stereotypes there is the view from the embassy window. Well, I don't get involved in those things. I just think about it back here from within the compound walls. And to be fair, sometimes you can't go outside the compound walls because of security issues. And there are a lot of good people, don't get me wrong, state that are engaging religious actors. But the point is, whatever institution you are, account for the nature and mission of your institution, but also account for the reality of religious actors doing good in the world. That religion can be an analytic factor, or it could be as pervasive as the air. It's everywhere, except you can't see it. And you've got to account for that if you're going to get your job done, but in a way that respects the reality of the religious actor in the local context.
And another question, in the report, you note that there is this increasing bipartisan consensus around the importance of religious engagement, but still, I think it's fair to say there's still a partisan dimension to these issues. Often religious freedom is viewed as more of a Republican or conservative priority, religious engagement more of a Democrat emphasis or priority. Why is that, and what could be done to further enhance a bipartisan attention to religious engagement and to religious freedom promotion?
Yeah, it's a tricky question and deserving of a dissertation. I think I don't like to use the word bipartisan, for example, with religious freedom. I think it's a nonpartisan issue that is in the marrow of our bones, and we get it right 51% of the time. Just like the difference between Rhode Island and Massachusetts from the 17th century. Massachusetts was a soft theocracy, had all the answers. Roger Williams says, I don't think that way, even though we have the same theology, and I want everybody to have a seat at the table because forced worship stinks in the nostrils of God. That's why we're going to do a civil experiment on this. And we should all be in the shoes of Roger Williams, hoping that everybody can bring their values to the table and speak into the public policy square. When religious freedom came back into the fore of American foreign policy in the mid-90s, that resulted in the creation of a report, the U.S. Commission, and an ambassador, it was mostly Republicans. And then with the last administration, it became a key issue, which further reinforced the image. It shouldn't be that way. It should be all of us as Americans working together. And my hope is, this may seem tangential, but my hope is that Ukraine, the war going on there and the model that it represents, calls us back to some of these basic things and moves us away from putting a qualifier on our faith. We're progressive or we're patriotic. Well, in my mind, if you use qualifiers, then you've already told me what I need to know about you as an actor. Your faith needs no defense, but together, no matter what faith, we defend all faiths and none. And Ukraine demonstrates the possibility of pluralism. A Jewish president of a Christian majority country whose family survived the Holocaust, from the Nazis to the West and to the East, the Holodomor of the famine that Stalin instigated against the Ukrainians, which was also genocide. And these guys are still there. They're still standing. That's what our future yearns for. So we got to get past our bad self about whether left or right or this or that. Say, hey, we're in a radical middle here where we agree to disagree agreeably, but we need your values at the table. No matter your point of moral departure, we have the same spiritual architecture where we can respect each other and engage each other and protect one another. Beyond that, no strong opinions.
Well, and speaking of issues of fostering pluralism and also the need for greater religious literacy, you have a new book on that subject. You want to just tell us a bit about that new publication, and congratulations on it.
Well, funny you should ask. Look at this. It's right here. There's Imam Majid, a dear friend of mine and brother of mine in Central Asia, talking to a nun. And basically what we said was we came up with a framework of the ends we seek, pluralism, call it covenantal pluralism, developed at the University of Washington and at the Templeton Religion Trust with Chris Stewart, Dennis Hoover, Jim Wellman at the UW, and cross-cultural religious literacy as a means of achieving pluralism. In the context of this conversation, I would say the chapter that we have on religious literacy is different than previous takes on religious literacy in that we encourage people to look at themselves as an actor, to know their own faith, and to recognize, as any good conflict resolution would teach, that once you engage an environment, you can't be impartial. You are a part of it. So what are you bringing into that context? What are you bringing into the equation that cannot help but impact the environment itself, and therefore how you exercise influence? Very important. So religious literacy for us, as I referenced earlier, there's you, the other, and what you do together. Because we live in a world where our global challenges demand partnerships where you will have to work with somebody who doesn't live, act, vote, pray like you do. Again, get past your bad self and say, okay, let's get it done. We got to take on climate change. We got to take on terrorism. We got to take on sex trafficking. We got to work together, and let's bring the best of our traditions together without watering anything down. Cross-cultural religious literacy is not about syncretism. It is about respecting the deep difference, and not difference to demean, but to dignify. And when I respect the essence of somebody's faith, then we can engage together and respect and protect one another because we understand the difference. Well, I'll stop there. I obviously am passionate about this topic and approach.
Certainly, yeah. And back to the US policy context for a moment. Last year, a number of new publications came out, reports and op-eds, just as they did at the start of the Trump administration, start of the Obama administration. There's sort of this glut of reports and op-eds that come out. I've contributed to it. You have, many of our friends and colleagues have, trying to encourage a new administration to take a particular approach as it relates to religious freedom promotion, engagement with religious actors, beefing up US religious literacy programs, and so on. What would it take in your mind to get to a point where there's still, of course, policy input from the outside, but not some of the underlying fear that a new administration will undo progress or will diminish religious freedom promotion or will sideline religious engagement? What needs to happen culturally or institutionally or programmatically to get to that point where there isn't that sort of fear every time there's a change of administration?
Yeah, that's a great question. A few thoughts. One is the fact that we always have the conversation at the beginning of an administration is actually not anymore, at least, indicative that the US foreign policy establishment won't take religion seriously. I think it's indicative that it is taking religion and religious freedom, religious literacy engagement seriously. So it doesn't matter what the administration is, it's going to be a factor of analysis. That's the good news. That's success, touchdown. What it looks like in any given administration, hey, that's according to the personalities and the desires and purposes of the president. That's his or her prerogative. Secondly, I would say I'm encouraged by these conversations because what we're also seeing is faith traditions recovering or making more, I should make not make more public, but bringing into the public sphere the tools within their traditions that help with reconciliation, that help with building pluralism in a practical, positive, covenanted way. And we need more of that. We need more of that. So that's very encouraging. And I think that within the academic realm, I think people are realizing that there is more than one definition of evidence, qualitative or quantitative, and that the sociological traditional definitions of evidence can be biased, and that faith has a role in understanding what evidence means. We're also seeing different units of analysis. Instead of global trends, we're thinking about the country as a unit of analysis, and within the country, different provinces or states, again, a function of leadership and culture and people groups. So there's a lot of positive things going forward that I think are quite encouraging. And with that comes to your first question, discussions of terms of reference, which can seem academic, but are actually good ways of thinking about what do we mean by this? And that becomes a way of building relationships across political or theological or operational differences.
And you noted there are some positive developments. I wanted to conclude by asking whether you're optimistic or not in terms of the fate of religious freedom and religious engagement globally. In recent years, there's been a lot of attention to the evidence, as you mentioned, related to particularly religious restrictions and how there's been some very worrying trends around rising restrictions around the world, rising intolerance, rising social hostilities related to religion and so on. So it can be a discouraging time for people who are in this field. I'm wondering if you are feeling encouraged or discouraged, if you're overall optimistic about where we might be headed.
Well, I'm an optimist by nature, so I can't help but be optimist, despite the fact that the pessimist has all the facts at this point, and Ukraine as well. And in fact, a report was just revealed today that was accidentally published on one of the Russian news sites. Analysts at Carnegie revealed this, and It shows just how much Putin thinks of himself as Holy Mother Russia, gathering his chicks, and that Ukraine is fundamental to that identity as a Russian, and therefore Ukraine is not a country. Well, that changes your whole analysis and perspective. Can we account for that in a better way beforehand for other conflicts around the world? I think we can. I'm encouraged by the discussions within these terms. For example, religious freedom. I've always said there's advocates and there's builders. Advocates are outside in, they're outside the country they're trying to influence. They're single issue, which is good. They're calling attention to the injustice. Good. But they're also builders who are inside out and working in a multi-issue, messy mosaic context where local partners don't review or consider religious freedom very important. Well, how do you create points of leverage? How do you work together? How can you be mutually aware within the religious freedom movement? Same thing with religious engagement. Is it transactional? Is it transformational? Where is it along the sphere? What does trust look like in this context? Who has had the relationships? And then, of course, the same is true with religious literacy. Is it just me trying to understand somebody else to get something done? Or is it me understanding myself now as a part of the equation? So there are spectrums or spectra that are being revealed within these definitions that I think can help us understand the intersections. And when we understand the intersections, I think we can understand ourselves better as policymakers and practitioners. And this goes especially for practitioners who are members of faith communities, because they have to better understand themselves and how they interact with governments. And in some ways, I'll leave you with these 2 points. I think there is a need for policy and government literacy by religious actors, because they're getting the seat at the table. But there's also a need, as my friend John Azuma from Ghana and Aza Karam from Religions for Peace would say, there's also a need for interreligious literacy. What do these coalitions look like working together? That's a different thing that needs more research as well. So we're moving in the right direction. And I think with the example of Ukraine, I think we are, as an optimist, seeing the end of the global recession in democracy, because we're remembering and recognizing what it means to be out of many one, to be a covenant of pluralism where we respect and protect the other as equal citizens under the transparent rule of law, where we all get a seat at the table. So we press on, we keep writing our articles, we keep doing these kinds of interviews, and we hope that other folks find them useful and they rebuke us where we're wrong, and we find ways to walk together where we're right together.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end on. Chris, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your insights and expertise with me in this interview. And thank you for the USIP report and for all the ways in which you've contributed to this field over the past couple of decades. Thanks.
You're very kind. Thank you.